Welcome back to Motivation Library, everybody. You know we're all about unlocking your potential, and today we're diving deep into a book that's become a bit of a modern classic in the self-improvement world.
Atomic Habits by James Clear, right.
That's the one. A book that really breaks down the power of tiny changes and how those seemingly insignificant shifts can lead to some seriously remarkable results.
It's all about those small, consistent actions adding up over time, like compound interest, but for self-improvement.
Exactly. And one of the things that makes Atomic Habits so compelling is that Clear doesn't just preach from on high. He starts off with a very personal story, a pretty harrowing one, actually.
Oh, you mean the baseball bat incident? Yeah, that'll get your attention.
As a high schooler, he was hit in the face with a baseball bat, suffered some pretty serious injuries, had to relearn basic functions like breathing and swallowing.
Tough stuff. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
For sure. And what's fascinating is how this experience became the catalyst for his whole exploration of habits. I mean, he literally had to rebuild his life one tiny step at a time.
So it wasn't about setting these massive, overwhelming goals. It was about those incremental, almost invisible improvements day after day.
Exactly. He focused on getting a little bit better each day, and it really started to snowball.
Yeah.
He worked his way back to playing baseball, even made the Denison University team.
See, that's what I love about this idea. It's not about being superhuman or having some crazy amount of willpower. It's about harnessing the power of consistency.
Right. It's like inch by inch, life's a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard.
That's a good one. And
Right.
Clear really drives home this point with the 1% rule, right?
Yeah, the idea that if you can just get 1% better each day, those small gains compound over time, leading to some pretty significant results.
And he uses the example of the British cycling team, which is pretty fascinating. They adopted this philosophy of marginal gains where they made tiny adjustments to everything.
Yeah, from the type of pillows the riders used to the paint on the inside of their team truck. I mean, they even considered the hand-washing habits of their mechanics. They were obsessed with optimizing every single detail, and it worked. They went on to dominate in the Olympics and the Tour de France.
It's a great example of what can happen when you shift your focus from those big, splashy outcomes to the small, seemingly insignificant actions that build towards them.
It's about the process, not just the product.
Exactly. Clear even goes so far as to say, forget about goals, focus on systems instead. And that's where things get really interesting. Because it challenges the way we typically approach achievement, right? We tend to focus on those big, audacious goals, but Clear argues that it's actually those small, consistent habits that make the real difference.
So it's not about reaching the finish line, it's about building a system for getting there. A system that you can rely on even when motivation is low.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. So what does this systems first approach actually look like in practice? What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners here? Well, it really starts with a shift in perspective. Instead of fixating on what you want to achieve, it's more about who you want to become. Clear talks about these three levels of change: outcomes, processes, and identity.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember this. So outcomes, those are like the results, right? And then processes, that's about the actions you take. But identity, that's getting down to the core beliefs, isn't it?
Exactly. And Clear argues that the most lasting change, the kind that really sticks, happens at that identity level. It means your actions, they need to be a reflection of the person you want to be.
So it's not enough to just say, I want to lose weight or I want to write a book. It's more about saying, I'm the kind of person who takes care of their health, or I'm a writer.
Precisely. He gives this really great example of an entrepreneur who wanted to stop biting his nails, right? He
Yeah.
tried everything, but nothing seemed to work.
Yeah, I remember that. So what was his secret weapon?
Manicures. He started getting regular manicures, like investing in this image of himself as a well-groomed professional. And it worked. Because it wasn't just about stopping a bad habit, it was about stepping into this new identity.
I love that. It's like he was saying, I'm the kind of person who takes care of themselves, not just, I want to stop biting my nails.
Right. It's about aligning your actions with your self-image, that desired identity.
So, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But how do you actually make those changes? I mean, how do you bridge that gap between wanting to be a certain type of person and actually becoming that person?
Well, that's where Clear introduces his famous 4 laws of behavior change. He says these laws are like the nuts and bolts of habit formation, backed by solid scientific research.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
So, according to Clear, if you want to build good habits, you need to make them obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Okay, I like where this is going. Break it down for us. What does it mean to make a habit obvious?
Well, it starts with awareness, right? We often go through life on autopilot, kind of mindlessly doing things without even realizing the cues that trigger our behaviors.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Mindlessly grabbing a cookie every time I walk past the kitchen counter. Guilty as charged.
Right. And to break those unconscious patterns, we need to shine a light on them, bring those habits into our conscious awareness.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we bring those hidden habits out into the open?
Clear shares this really interesting example from Japan, a technique used by train operators to reduce errors. It's called pointing and calling.
Pointing and calling. Okay, that sounds a little intense.
It might seem a little strange, but hear me out. These train operators, they actually point at signals and call out commands, to really make sure they're fully aware of their actions.
Ah, so it's about being super mindful, right? Not just going through the motions, but really being present in the moment.
Exactly. And Clear suggests using something called implementation intentions for our own habits. It's basically creating a specific plan for when and where you will perform a new habit.
So instead of just saying, I want to meditate more, it's about being super specific, like every morning after I brush my teeth, I will meditate for 5 minutes in my living room.
Exactly. By defining the when and the where, you're giving your brain a clear trigger for the behavior.
So you're not relying on willpower, you're just setting up the environment for success.
Right. And he also talks about something called habit stacking, which is basically linking a new habit to an existing one.
So you're piggybacking on the automaticity of something you already do regularly. Like, after I pour my morning coffee, I will write down 3 things I'm grateful for.
Exactly. It's all about leveraging those existing routines to make it easier to stick with the new behavior.
Okay, making habits obvious, check. But what about those habits that we know are good for us, but we just don't feel motivated to do them? How do we make those habits more appealing?
That's where Clear's second law comes in. Make it attractive. This is about tapping into our brain's reward system because, let's be honest, we're much more likely to stick with things that feel good.
Okay, that makes sense.
Hmm.
So what's the secret sauce? How do we make those healthy habits more enticing?
Well, Clear suggests a strategy called temptation bundling, where you pair something you need to do with something you want to do.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Didn't Clear use this strategy himself?
He did. He only allowed himself to watch his favorite Netflix shows while exercising. Pretty clever, huh?
That is brilliant. He basically turned working out into a reward.
And he's not alone. Think about ABC's TGIT campaign, those Shonda Rhimes shows that everyone was hooked on. They cleverly encouraged viewers to pair their Thursday night viewing with things like wine and popcorn, making it a whole social event.
So they were basically associating their shows with activities that people already found enjoyable.
Exactly. They made it a whole experience, something to look forward to.
Okay, so temptation bundling, I like it. But what about those habits that just feel like a chore, no matter how we try to dress them up? How do we make those habits easier to stick with?
Right. It's all about making those tough habits a little less daunting, removing those obstacles that make it easy to procrastinate. And then there's Clear's fourth law, make it satisfying.
Okay, this one sounds promising.
Yeah.
Because we all want those good vibes, right?
Exactly. This is all about the rewards, making those habits enjoyable enough that we're actually motivated to repeat them. And it's not just about those external rewards, like treating yourself to something nice. It's about that internal sense of satisfaction that comes with making progress.
So it's about tapping into that feel-good factor that keeps us going. But how do we actually make those habits more satisfying? Any practical tips?
Well, one of Clear's big recommendations is habit tracking. It's such a simple tool, but it can be surprisingly effective.
Yeah, I've heard of this. The idea is to visually track your progress, right? Kind of like a visual reminder of your commitment.
Exactly. And there's a reason it works so well. It taps into our brain's reward system. Every time we check off a day on our habit tracker, we get this little hit of dopamine, that feel-good chemical.
Ah, so it's like giving ourselves a little pat on the back each time we stay on track. Positive reinforcement in action.
Precisely. And Clear even talks about some historical figures who used this to their advantage. Remember Benjamin Franklin?
Oh, yeah, one of the founding fathers, right? A pretty accomplished guy.
He was all about self-improvement. And he famously carried around this little notebook where he tracked his virtues. And then there's Trent Dursman, the stockbroker, who used paper clips to track his sales calls.
Paper clips. Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more about this paperclip strategy.
So he'd start each day with 120 paper clips in one jar. And every time he made a call, he'd move a paperclip to another jar. Simple, but effective.
Wow, that's a great visual representation of progress. And I bet that feeling of moving those paper clips, seeing those jars fill up, was super motivating.
Exactly. It's all about making that progress tangible, giving ourselves that visual feedback. But of course, we all slip up sometimes. No one's perfect, right?
Definitely not. I've had my fair share of those off days. So, what happens when you miss a day on your habit tracker? Do you just throw in the towel?
Not at all. Clear's big thing is not breaking the chain. It's all about aiming for consistency rather than perfection. It's about showing up even when you don't feel like it. He even has this rule called never miss twice.
Okay, I like that. So if you stumble, you just get right back on track. No guilt trips, no dwelling on the past.
Exactly. It's about minimizing those lapses, preventing them from derailing your progress.
Because it's not about being perfect, it's about being resilient. And sometimes, when willpower just isn't enough, a little accountability can go a long way.
Absolutely. Clear suggests finding a reliable accountability partner, someone who'll support you on your journey, or even creating a habit contract where you outline your goals and the consequences for not meeting them.
Oh, I like this idea of a habit contract. It's like making a deal with yourself,
Right.
putting some skin in the game.
Right. It's about adding a layer of consequence to make those bad habits less appealing. And it can get pretty creative. There's this great example of entrepreneur Brian Harris, who actually created a contract with his wife and trainer outlining his weight loss goals.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What were the stakes?
Well, if he skipped his workouts, he had to wear an Alabama hat, his rival team, for a whole week.
Oh, that's hilarious. Now that's commitment. It definitely makes those consequences a lot more real.
It's all about finding what works for you. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from Atomic Habits is that it's not about finding this magic formula or quick fix. It's about understanding those underlying principles of human behavior and using them to our advantage.
Right, it's about creating a system that supports our goals, makes those positive changes more likely, and helps us become the best versions of ourselves.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Atomic Habits, we want to leave you with a final thought. You've learned about the science of small changes, the importance of building systems, and the power of aligning your habits with your natural strengths. Now it's time to put it all into practice.
What one tiny habit will you focus on today? What small step can you take to start creating those remarkable results in your own life? Because even the smallest actions consistently applied can have a truly transformative impact.
We've included some links to habit tracking tools and additional resources in the show notes, so be sure to check those out.
And thanks for joining us here at Motivation Library. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, not a destination. But with the right tools and strategies, we can all unlock that incredible potential within ourselves.
Absolutely. Even those tiny changes, those atomic habits, can add up to something truly extraordinary. So go out there and make those small steps count.